Hi and welcome to another episode of Heroes and Villains of Warmachine. I'm Chris and this is Dark Days Radio Dark Iron. So we're going to look at a character that is related to the fane of Nyrro, the recent army released for Warmachine. And this is a character who is also related to the Cricks and also related to the retribution of Syra. And we're going to talk about Goreshade or Ghyrrshyld. So Goreshade starts out as this elven warcaster, arcanist and warlord, and he threatens the stability of Eos before his transformation into an eldritch and being banished, and obviously having to travel the lands, make allegiance with the Cricks forces before returning and slaying the gods. So let's get into how that all happens. So Goreshade, or Ghyrrshyld as he was known, rose to power within House of Vyre and became the singular Narcissar of and High Consul of the house. His aspirations did not stop there. He sought to rule all of Eos as an emperor and sought to avert for Eos the fate that he foresaw, because of course the elven lives were growing shorter, children were being born soulless because of the missing gods. At some point they'd disappeared, and of course humans had gained the power of magic, something which he believed was obviously tied together. He was a mind that absorbed much arcane power and lore, having acquired it from numerous places, including the cult of Nyrro. And that was no simple task and no random chance, for the fane of Nyrro recognized it within him an opportunity, and so fed this lore that they had to him. Necromantic lore that allowed them to sever their souls from the gods. He also travelled to other places, even taking the works from Thamar and from the dark kingdom of Mord that existed within where now the Thornwood exists. So all the time Ghyrrshyld was increasing his arcane lore, arcane knowledge, mystical arts and power, and growing a small army, training them within his own fane, within his own house. Now there was some dissent and dissonance, but that was mainly dismissed as arcanists and cantrics in the house grew in power, and their arts and technologies grew in might, rivaling that of House Shiel. And their expertise in myrmidon construction was even surpassing this other house. And in battle, Ghyrrshyld did not hold back. He was often in the thick of it, getting soaked in blood. He was unforgiving, drawing the ire of Trollkin and other factions. He was considered quite the murderous combatant. Now, all this time, he's growing his library of arcane arts, mystical arts, even including the heretical and profane knowledge of the cult of Nyrro, having been funneled to him by the very people in that ancient eldritch society. And this all comes to a head when his cousin gives birth to a soulless child. Few had been born to House Vyre, and many of which had been born soulless. And so in a rage, he took this child, tore them from the arms of the mother, took them to the consulate court, held the child aloft, proclaiming the failings of the court and the doom of the elven people, and then dashed the child's head on the stones of the court. Driven in rage and grief, his demands for war grew, obviously seeing the humans as being a cause for the downfall of the elves. And there was call for its arrest, at which point the guard of House of Fire opened up and, attacked the agents of the court. And so began the War of Houses that spiraled out of control. Lesser houses banded with House of Fire, other ones banded with against House Sheer with Ghyrrshyld, and they deployed myrmidons in numbers never seen before, and he used his knowledge of the cities to his advantage and lay siege to the elven cities for his advantage. He wanted to take it quickly, and all the while the city consulate refused to acknowledge the rule of Ghyrrshyld. And within the shadows, you have the forces of Ashmael, who was a member of the Fane of Nyrro, also lending their support. They saw Ghyrrshyld as a way of changing the nature of rulership and power in the kingdom of Eos to allow the Fane of Nyrro's return. So other houses joined, such as House Silure, and in the fight against House Vir and Ghyrsshyld's forces, and soon enough the Vir forces were forced all the way back to Iris, their city, and the war continued for a few more years, leaving all houses weakened and, many of their arms and weapons destroyed. So despite, though, Ghyrsshyld's lofty ideals, in secret his Arcanists and himself been performing many profane experiments on the souls born to the elves. Chamber of horror that they had created in experimentations on the body and the soul, and many of their experiments mirrored those made by the Fane of Nyrro centuries ago by that cult that had been banished. Many, of course, perished in these experiments, but it did unlock for Ghyrrshyld more and more of this profane knowledge that would allow him for his eventual transformation and the knowledge for what he would go on to do. Finally, Retribution forces, the Retribution of Syra, stepped in. Not wanting to be associated with the madness of House Vir, they were willing to help the other houses to protect the holy sites and the city of Syra, and they punched deep into the territory of House Vir and caused Ghyrrshyld to flee. But he had been mortally wounded in the process. Ghyrrshyld, armed with knowledge that had been funneled to him, was brought before the Fane of Nyrro and Oricant Vosilis, who is the leader of the Fane of Nyrro now. And so Oricant saw in Ghyrrshyld a protege and sought to help this elf, this master of mystical arts, to transform into an eldritch fully. They did so, expecting the new Ghyrrshyld to join the Fane of Nyrro, but Ghyrrshyld rejected them. He had different designs on his future, and rejected Vosilis, who was obviously hurt by their protege fleeing. And so Ghyrrshyld fled to the lands beyond Eos, eventually coming to the islands of Cryx, and over time gained the name of Goreshade. He allied himself with Aphixius and learned ever more lore about the nature of souls, the nature of death, the realms beyond, the void, etc. And in return, obviously performed services to the Nightmare Empire of Cryx, leading their armies, but often also would take his forces on his own missions for his own purposes. He began to believe that the place where elven souls were going upon death was the same place that Banes came from, the void. And Aphixius was fine with this, as long as his, not student, but at least asset, was performing works that benefited Cryx. Goreshade, to his mind, could do whatever he wanted. Now, Goreshade's mind would eventually be twisted by his interaction with such dark arts, dark magics, to deal with the void and to deal with necromancy. But he did come upon the conclusion and plan that to save the elves, he needed to destroy the gods fully. They had to die. And so he risked his own soul in committing the force of Cryx in engagements for his own plans. He even allied himself with dragons who were rivals of Torok in order to discover the resting place of Nissor, and turned to the Fane of Nyrro for support. So Goreshade returned to Eos, went to the tunnels where the Fane of Nyrro had been hiding in secret for centuries, and asked them for help. And Oricant Tyrios would provide that support. And so they came upon the resting place of one of the gods, So, beneath the Morrowind Cathedral in Kursk, Goreshade sought to kill Nyrro, though barely could. Escaped with Voss and continued on his crusade to hunt down the elven gods and kill them. And so, armed with Nyrro's sword, Goreshade invaded the fane of Syra, supported by the fane of Nyrro, sought to slay the remaining two gods, and accompanied by Oricon Tyrios. Tyrios was unmade. Ashmael, who was also present, barely escaped their life, and Goreshade, through a challenge of will and words, survived and was by some means restored to life, now being an agent for the gods once more, and once more being known as Ghyrrshyld, the Returned, the Forgiven. And so Ghyrrshyld joined the Retribution on a new crusade. Even on the field of battle now, Ghyrrshyld still commanded some necromantic arts and were able to bring back the dead or the dying back to life. And eventually the turn of Goreshade's and Ghyrshyd's destiny was with the invasion of the Scorn. Again, they were facing a people tied to the elven gods, and they fought against each other. They had knowledge, mortothurgy, which related again to the nature of undeath and souls and pain and necromancy. But this rivalry and conflict between the forces of the Scorn and the forces of the Retribution of Syra eventually changes with the invasion of the Infernals, the ancient enemy of the elven gods, the ones to whom elven souls were flowing to because the elven gods were gone, or at least most of them were gone. So, allying himself with the Scorn warlock Hexorus, Ghyrrshyld combined arcane lore of the elves, necromancy of the Cricks, the profane arts of the fane of Nyrro, and mortothurgy of the Scorn to create a device, a singular device and arts to save the souls of the elves, to fight back against the Infernals, and understand the secrets of the Void. This would ultimately lead to Ghyrshyd's mind being further twisted, becoming an Archon of the Void, and turning, though, the tide of battle against the Infernals, and then eventually turning on the forces of Scorn. But Ghyrrshyld would be finally marked for death when the Consulate Court would call upon Falcia, an assassin, to fell Ghyrrshyld. But not before Ghyrshyd's final goals were at least passed on to a student. And so Voas would fall into the hands of Elara, who would finally kill the elven gods and create a pathway for the return of Oricon Valasis and the Fane of Nyrro. So there we go. Goreshade, or Ghyrrshyld, has a interesting, intricate history with many factions within Warmachine and ties to where we are now with the Kingdom of Dusk, the Iozan elves, the remnants of those people, and of course the new forces of the Fane of Nyrro that are now present, and House Callus. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got any questions or notes, pop them in the chat, and we'll be back with more next time. So goodbye for now.